There was a Roman philosopher and a statesman by the name of Seneca who said, if one does not know which port one is sailing, no wind is favorable. So that's not about getting caught up in the activity of detail, that we have to have everything detailed with regards to the port that we're sailing to. But it's in the knowing of where we're sailing to, in spite of the fog, in spite of the mystery, knowing unequivocally, infallibly where we're sailing to. And if we don't know where we're sailing to, then no wind is favorable. No support system, no rah-rah, no nothing that shows up will match our expectation, because we will be living in an energy of unknowing. And it's as simple as that. We're either in a state of unknowing or knowing. And I wouldn't say that it's an either or. I think we vacillate. I think there are things that we know. We know that when we go to bed that the earth is going to continue to rotate on its axis, at least for this year, that the sun will rise. We know certain things, certain natural laws. And we want to be able to know or move into a state of spiritual knowing, that the port that we're sailing to is an eternality of great beauty that's indescribable, that's particularized in terms of its vibration of power and wisdom and knowledge and wholeness. And as we're sailing to those things, here's the irony. It's just what I said about the peace candle. Those things already are. So I'm not talking about some futurized heaven. I'm talking about the fact that that which we deem or term heaven is already here. That it's actually pitted and rooted all along the pathway of life. And it becomes our opportunity, our great pleasure to stop, to recognize, and to glean, and to accept and allow those things wherever we are. That's the port. That's the thing. And so if we don't know that, or we resist that, or if we're simply ignorant of that, which many of us have been through stages of our life, then it doesn't matter who showed up or who shows up, we still won't get it, because we're not in that avenue of knowing. So the founder of this philosophy, Ernest Holmes, wrote long ago that life, then, this pathway, is infinite energy. It's infinite energy, but it's coupled with limitless creative imagination. So we're making it up as we go. As we evolve, more things are coming to us, and so we are making up what we're able to receive simply through willingness and consciousness and self-awareness. So you might know this gentleman. He would switch services. Sometimes he'd come first service, sometimes second service. But Roger, who would sit on the back row, wore the dark sunglasses. He had a vision problem for several decades of his life, entered hospice last week. And his wife had called me. Roger's just the sweetest guy. And when his wife called me and told me what had happened and the circumstances and asked me if I would come, I said, absolutely. And when I first went, Roger didn't want to see me. And it was because there was a fear that by seeing me, it was kind of that Catholic last rites thing. And he was like, I'm not ready. I'm not ready, which totally understand, right? And then the decline was pretty rapid. And so after Thursday night's meditation class, she had called again, and I said, I can get there as soon as class is over. And so I went, and she had been there all day. And she said, I'm just so exhausted. I said, go home. I'll sit with him. And as I sat with him, he was unable to speak, but boy, he really wanted to talk. So he was trying. And that, coupled with the rattle in the chest, made for some interesting communication. Roger's favorite song that we sing is the one we sing after the prayer, with every prayer. So I sang it to him in his ear. I told him what a great job he had done. I told him that he was loved. All of the things that we all want to hear and all the things that are true, but sometimes we're not in a space to receive it. And I just kept repeating these. And I sat with Roger for for a couple of hours. And he would go in and out of consciousness, and I would place my hand on his heart. And I had this awareness that life starts with the heart. The rhythm of the heart, which, brings through the blood, which brings life in and of itself, that's the portal by which all life begins. But as the death rattle was happening, and as I was holding that, and I knew that the fluid was creating in the lung and the respiratory area, that's also the exit of life as well. It has nothing to do with the mind or the brain or the intellect. It has everything to do with the heart. And I became fascinated as I placed my hand on his chest of how often we migrate away from this central portal. By migrate away from this central portal, I'm talking about we abandon the heart, which is the entry and the exit way, and we travel up in here into the brain and we think ourselves to death. Rather than beginning to trust and to think through the heart, to feel and to acknowledge that which is wanting to lead us to passion, to fearlessness, to mystery, to be led by the heart, not the mind per se, but the heart. And after I finally left, the next morning I was doing my weekly mastermind session with Dr. Will Coleman, and we meet at Einstein's every Friday morning. And of Einstein's, because we couldn't just go to any place named something different than Einstein's, right? So we're masterminding. And I was telling him this, and he said, well, aren't we all in hospice? And boy, did that catch my attention. And I went, oh my God, you're right. We're all in hospice to a degree, because the moment that we come through the portal and the heart is activated, we're already migrating to the exit. The moment that the first breath takes its place within us, we're already on the journey out. And we both got out our phones and we looked up the root word of hospice, because we're into etymology, and we're like, see who could get there fastest. And my network was better than his. So hospice, the Latin derivation of hospice, like hospitable, it simply means actually two spectrums, guests or host. So a hospice or hospitable or hospi, coming from that Latin derivative, simply means to be a guest or a host. And so the world then is a host, and we are the guest. We are the guest. And the host, in its hospitality and offering hospice, only has one rule, and that is equality for all. Because as the host, it gives everyone breath. As the host, it gives everyone free will. As the host, it gives everyone the opportunity to uncover and to reconnect with their own brilliance to the degree and to the determination and at the rate of speed by which they're willing to do that. As guests, as we're making our way through the exit in this hospice, we either are a really great guest and we treat all other guests equal, understanding that we're all doing the same thing, or we fight and scrap and abide by the illusion of an us and them. And so all of us are in hospice. And so the determination and the quality of our hospice stay and the degree by where we're at with that is really dependent upon consciousness. And so we can disintegrate or we can regenerate as we travel down this particular journey of life. And as we forge ahead, as Carl so beautifully gave us the imagery and the wisdom of that, as we're forging ahead into possibly elder years, some of us may not have that luxury. But wherever we are in this stage of hospice, as we are moving through, a vision is required. A vision is required. And so we don't just surrender and accept to the life of humanity and race consciousness. We enter into humanity with a vision connected to that which is spiritual. And so we don't become the sufferers of man's inhumanity to man, but we become patriots vessels and instruments of light that access and know that wherever we go in this journey, that we are bringing about and producing everything that is equivalent to the quality and the atmosphere of our thought. And so in this vision, sometimes we get caught up in what the world tells us about aging. And what does the world tell us about aging? It's 2 words. It sucks. Okay? And so all products and all advertising are preventative. How do you prevent this thing? As if that's possible, right? Because we're all in hospice. And we're all traveling at our own rate of speed to that exit portal, which is nothing to fear. It's natural. It's a part. It's a part of the journey. And as Seneca said, if I don't know where my port is, then no wind will assist me. My port, my exit, is an inevitable entryway into an eternal experience. This is but a blip on the screen of my eternality, of your eternality, a blip. And so when we begin to consider that, who's in charge of the quality of this little microcosm of your experience? You and I are. And so when I begin to fully accept that, I don't necessarily get caught up in legacy. Oh my God, what's my legacy? I have to agree with our founder, Ernest Holmes, in The Science of Mind, who actually says, I wouldn't concern yourself about leaving a legacy. Because really, that's wrapped up in ego, isn't it? What will people think of me after I'm gone? Who cares what they think about us after we're gone? Because the work that I'm involved in and what I'm creating must be birthed from the now, not birthed from what will people think of me after I leave. Do you see how being concerned about leaving a legacy takes you out of the now? And it's very insidious, but it's all about this ego thing of trying to manufacture or control the future. And as we're on this pathway, as we're moving out of the portal of the exit of the heart into the next experience, we get to free ourselves from that. But along the way, some stuff's going to happen. Some stuff's going to happen. I don't know if it's happened to you yet or not, but stuff's going to happen. And so it reminds me of the Buddha, Siddhartha, when he was sitting under the Bodhi tree as he was on the verge of enlightenment. And it is said on the eve of that enlightenment, when the scales were tipping and he was migrating out of the density of humanity into the encompassing of his spirituality, on the eve of that, he was visited by the forces of Mara, which is a Buddhist term which simply means illusion. It's the same thing that happened to Jesus the Christ when he went into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. If you were raised Christian, what happened there? Jesus was tempted, right? With everything, all temptation known to humankind. And the thing about the Buddha and the thing about Jesus the Christ was in the inconvenience of that, and I use that word kind of ironically, because it was much more than an inconvenience. But in the inconvenience of that, Jesus goes, this desert sucks. I'm getting out of here. I'm checking into the Holiday Inn. And then left. He stayed in the inconvenience. The Buddha, as he was sitting there, and as that which was the forces of Mara were being subjected upon him, he didn't get up and say, this is really uncomfortable, and leave. He stayed. And so in the staying then, this is what began to happen. On the eve when Buddha was to gain enlightenment, he sat under this tree while he was sitting there attacked by the forces of Mara, and the story goes that they shot arrows at him, and their weapons turned into flowers. They're arrows. They shot arrows at him, and those arrows turned into flowers. And so what the story means is that what we habitually regard as our enemy is really our friend. Everything on the portal, as we're in hospice and as we're moving forward, everything that is labeled as an enemy, everything that is labeled as opposition or adversarial is actually there as a part of the requirement of the journey for our soul's growth. But if I haven't done the work, if I haven't become curious, if I haven't done the inner inquiry about who am I and why am I here, then I will always view those things as weapons, as attacks, as adversary, rather than beginning to see them for the beauty of what they are. And so the Buddhists say that there are 4 maras in this attack. The first one is the Devaputra, which involves the seeking of pleasure. So when pain presents itself, we run like crazy to try and be comfortable. Our addiction isn't necessarily to substance per se, but it is in the avoidance of that pain. And when pain arises, we reach and we reach and we reach for something to be able to blot that out. And so in the example of Jesus the Christ or the Buddha or any sage wise master, one of the lessons then in this journey from the portal of birth to the portal of death is, what is my relationship with pain? And we realized then that in the Devaputra Mara, that so often we have succumbed to, how do I get out of here? Rather than sitting and seeking and understanding that it is a part of our soul's growth. So one of the ways that happens when we're trying to, how do I get out of here, is we're products of convenience. We're trying to look for the easy way out. And in the convenience, we're trying to rationalize, we're trying to do everything to bring everything to the side of that particular story, rather than allowing ourselves to move through the pain in order to get through to the other side. It reminded me of this joke about this very overweight man who worked in a particular office, and everybody in the office loved him, and they were very concerned about him. And so they talked to him about his health and how they were willing to work with him and support him and champion him and anything that he chose to do. And so he really took that on, and he said, thank you. And one of the first things that he needed to change that was really uncomfortable or was a justification or convenience was the route that he would take to get to work. And in that route, the same way, every week, he would drive by a bakery. And so the car, he had no control. The car would just move over, and he would stop. And as he would get things for himself, he would also buy things for everybody else in the office. And everybody said, don't bring us those things. It's fine. We would rather you take a different route. And sometimes, life says, take a different route. Sometimes you have to shake things up a little bit. And so he began to heed that advice, and he did. And one morning, he just wasn't fully there, wasn't fully present, and like by habit, he just started to go the old way. And he looked up, and there's the bakery. And he prayed to Jesus, and he said, Dear Jesus, if I'm not meant to stay there, if I'm not meant to stop there, then don't let there be a parking spot. And so when he walked in to the office with this massive cake and all these pastries, people are like, what's going on? And he told them, he said, I prayed to Jesus, and I said, if I'm not supposed to stop there, don't let there be a parking spot. And he says, when I circled the block 7 times, and finally there was one there, I knew that I was supposed to stop. And so we become very creative in the way in which we want to avoid the inconvenience or avoid the change or avoid the pain. And even though the story's funny, we know that anything like that, any kind of addictive behavior, whether it's sex, whether it's gambling, whether it's food, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, all of us have addictive portions of our personality. And if we don't really look behind what that is, then we can change the scenery, but we really haven't had a conversation with the pain to really try to understand what that is. And so the Buddha, Jesus the Christ, these people, they don't try to just rearrange the scenery or do it through willpower. We all have to then sit with that and say, what must change? And that's a part of the inevitability, the requirement of our soul's growth. The next one is the skandha mara, which is how we react when we feel that the rug has been pulled out from under us. So if we've lost a job, or you find out your spouse has been cheating on you, or some big thing takes you by surprise, and there's that where you swallow that in, and that trauma rests inside of your DNA because you don't breathe that out. And so it's like, what happens then within us? Because we're still making our exit, right? We're still making our exit through the portal. And if I haven't examined my reaction and why I am reacting that way, then again, what's cyclical about this is if I don't deal with it now, I get the same trauma again, I get the same trauma again, and I get the same trauma again, all wrapped up in different personalities in different cities. Do you know what? The trauma still exists in Hawaii. So, it doesn't matter where you move to. So as we continue to go down this, we have to look at the rage that comes up within us, or we have to look at the fact that we label these things as an attack. And so what hasn't happened was we haven't finished the process. And finishing the process is realizing that the arrows that are being directed towards us can be turned into flowers when, as Seneca says, we know what our port is. Again, it doesn't mean that we don't feel. And that's part of the next Mara. It doesn't mean that we don't feel. But it means that we never go so completely overboard that we forget who we are and what we're made of and where we're going. And I remember when my sister Becky died, she was the next to the oldest. Brenda was the oldest, and then Becky. And Becky had multiple sclerosis for almost 3 decades. And that was started in the 70s, so that was long before they had all the treatments that they have now. And so when Becky passed, if I had a favorite, it was Becky, because Becky took care of me when I was a little boy. She was much older than me. So she was really my mom. She's the one that gave me the crew cuts. She's the one that put Vaseline in my hair. You know, she's the one who drove me to school and bought my manila paper for art class. And she's the one that did everything, basically. And so Becky and I had this bond. And I knew her favorite things. And so I had ordered a special headstone. And on this headstone, it had some things that were indicative of what meant something to her. And so that meant that the headstone was going to be delayed. And when we had the service, all those things weren't ready yet. And I made a special trip back because the place that I had ordered it from let me know that it had arrived. And so I went back to Beaumont, Texas, and I asked my mother if she wanted to go. And my mother was very feeble, and it was very challenging for her to walk. And Forest Lawn in Beaumont, Texas has got all these hills and bumps and gravel. And I said, you know, it's going to be a little iffy, but I'll hold on. So she came with me, and we walked, and there was my dad's over there, and there was my older sister Brenda's over there, and there was my stepdad's over there. And I looked back at my stepdad's, and my mom's was right there. And I looked at her, and I looked at that, and she said, I got it on sale. There's her name. You know, it had the birth date and the dash, and then the engraving hadn't been finished yet. She got it on sale. That was my mom. And so I had this flash. Now, my mom and I, our relationship was quite rocky, but I had this flash of inspiration, and I said, Mom, why don't we dance on your grave? I mean, literally. How many people actually get to physically dance on their own grave? Graves themselves are so passé, right? So this was like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. She was totally game for it. And in her wobbly nature, we did a little foxtrot, a little hoochie-coochie thing. And it was probably the most incredible moment that I have captured in my memory about my mom. Because the metaphor of that is so powerful. And what happens is when we don't run away from the inconvenience. It's like you're dancing on the inevitability of the portal and you're joyful about that. There's nothing to fear. The next one is the klesha mara, which is the relationship with strong emotion and how reactive that we become. And again, we've talked about this so much, but it's about the full spectrum of emotion and how we've grown up to think that some emotions are acceptable or good and some are not. And so much of what emotional intelligence is about is the fact that if it's all God, then every range of emotion on that spectrum is there as a benefit. Yes, even anger. If it's channeled appropriately, if we have appropriate flowing relationship with all emotion. But if one is suppressed or one is considered bad or judged, then like a radiator in a car, when you take that cap off, something happens, some trigger happens, and it explodes inappropriately. But if we have a relationship with that and understand that all of these things are working together for our good, then we can say something without raising or screaming our voice, and we can honor that full spectrum because those are some of the things that are on the pit stop on this pathway as we make our exit out of the portal. If I can't have emotional intelligence, then I'm going to have to keep recreating the same circumstances over and over again, the same triggers over and over again, right? So in meditation class on Thursdays, it's a very large class, and they had an assignment a couple of weeks ago to bring in a baby picture. And so everybody brought in their baby picture, and we did the Ho'oponopono exercise, the prayer, the ancient Hawaiian healing prayer, which has a long origin and a fascinating story, but the gist of it is this: I love you, I apologize, please forgive me, and thank you. That's the prayer. And so they were to take their baby picture in their hand and to look at that image and to do the Ho'oponopono practice, that prayer, and to continue to say, I love you, I apologize, please forgive me, and thank you. And to repeatedly do that, and then I said, now pass your picture to the person to the right. And their picture then traveled through 45 hands as they all each did the energy, that energy into that image, understanding and abiding by the rule spiritually that we all are one. So whatever grievance, whatever trauma has happened to that baby in that picture, we all have on a spiritual cosmic level attributed to that. Because we don't get to say, oh, that doesn't have anything to do with me, because if we're all one, there's not two oneses, there's not two unities, there's only one collective of which I'm a part of the conscious and the unconscious energy of the life, of world, of thought. And so as I take ownership, I also take responsibility in the healing and the transformation of the planet. And so we do this, and it goes all the way around. People have had a great time, and there's emotion, and you know, they get their picture back, and it's like they understand that 45 people have held this image and blessed this image. And then I said, okay, guess what's next? And I said, now you get to take the baby pictures of those in our governmental leadership, and you get to look at those pictures, and you get to say, I love you. I apologize. Please forgive me. Thank you. Right? Because what's going to happen on the journey? What's going to happen on the journey? At some point, the inconvenience of the selection of who we love and who we don't love is going to have to dissolve. As inconvenient as that feels. Because then we're doing spirituality light. And so we take that and we look at how in that klesha mara, the reaction that happens and the inflammation that comes and the rage and that heightened sense of energy begins to affect and threaten the physicality of the vehicle that we've been given to do this job. And it ain't pretty sometimes. But we're not living up to or approaching the full potential in our degree of hospice stay as guests. Remember, the host doesn't care. The host doesn't differentiate. The host doesn't say to all those people, I'm going to deny you air. They breathe the same air that we breathe. And so where do we then, as guests, have the right to deny the love and the understanding and the awareness that each and every one of us is on the same journey in the same hospice, traveling towards the same exit? And the last one then is the Yamamara, which is basically the fear of death. The actual basic fear. Fear that actually resembles control. So this is where we go back to what we said in the beginning, that the world is really feeding this machine of control. Like, hey, if you buy this, you'll be able to control that exit out of that portal. When in actuality, do we ever really get to do that? Because all kinds of things can happen along the way in our stay in hospice. And so it doesn't matter if you meditate more or jog more or eat more green things, which all of those are wonderful. But hear me out. If you're doing them out of fear, hear me, if you're doing them out of this energy of prevention, which is fear-based, because you're worried about that, that's a different thing than doing those things because you've fallen in love with what you are. And you want to maximize your hours here, your days here, and you want to live in accordance with that. Not because you're trying to prevent something, because what you're trying to prevent is going to happen. But that you love yourself enough that you're choosing to not go down and drive the same street and stop somewhere else. And so that's the difference. And those are the four maras. Those are the same temptations of Christ. Those are the things that happen on this pathway as we're all patients in hospice. So Tuesday night, I think it may be last Tuesday in practitioner class, I read to them a quote from our founder, Ernest Holmes, and it said, "We are intended to be free." Intended. Like when you showed up, when you came out of the portal into life, the whole intention of your arrival, the intention of that is for you to be free, to experience the freedom that you already are. And then he says, all nature conspires to produce and manifest the freedom of the individual. And I said, isn't that just a little pithy, beautiful, poetic statement? And I said, if that's all it is to you, you're not hearing it. Listen, all nature conspires to produce and manifest the freedom of the individual. Number one, you are the individual. Number two, you are a part of nature. You are the natural evolution component instrument of that which is the natural creation of the world of intelligence. So you are the natural individual, and nature does what? It conspires to produce and manifest your freedom. Conspires. It doesn't sit and smoke a cigarette and think about it. It conspires. So that conspiring energy does what? So we've made our entrance, and automatically we're on our way out. And in that journey, the natural element of intelligence itself is conspiring to get your attention in order for you to transcend all of that illusion which tells you you are less than. It's conspiring, doesn't let up. And so as you move through all of these stops, all of these energies, the things that happen to the Buddha, the things that happen to Jesus the Christ, those things are that because why? Because we are all the Buddha sitting under the tree. Every single one of us. There wasn't just one Buddha, you are the Buddha. There wasn't just one Christ consciousness, you are the Christ consciousness on your own path, in your own desert, having your own experience during hospice. And so what are we going to do about that? What are we going to do about that? If we're all the Buddha sitting under the tree, then we're all gaining enlightenment to the degree that we don't run away from the Mara, but we're willing to transcend the arrows that the world tells us are arrows into flowers. And the only way that that happens is through just showing up and doing it. Pain by pain, disappointment by disappointment, victory by victory, friendship by friendship, loss by loss. But each of those things are neither good nor bad. They are part of the beautiful complexity of the program that you and I have come here to walk through. And so again, today I tell you that you're all Buddha. You're all the Christ. There is no separation. There's no deifying anything. They're all examples of the one great story of the path to enlightenment. And if you were not equipped to be successful, you wouldn't be here. If your soul was not ready to say, okay, here we go again. All right, this time. If you weren't ready to go one more time around, you wouldn't be here. So you're already a success. What's going to happen is already there. What's determined is the quality of this journey while we all are in hospice. And I believe that you are up for the task. And so it is. Hi, I'm David Ault, and I simply want to say thanks. Thanks for taking the time to watch our broadcast here at Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta. We have a vision, and that vision is to reawaken all to their spiritual magnificence. And one of the ways that we are able to do that is through this very medium of broadcasting. So if you got anything out of this, if you felt in any way inspired, or if something spoke to you directly, then I extend an invitation to you to become a part of our family by donating. And there are many ways in order for you to be able to do that. One is to simply go to our website at slca.com, and there you will find all different kinds of prompts that will help you support what it is that we are doing here in Atlanta. One way is to become a pledger. That means that you decide on a monthly basis that you are going to help us with this vision. Another way is to donate through our management system called Fellowship One, another through PayPal, and another even easier way is on your cell phone. You can do what's called text to tithe, and that number is 404-796-7030. Again, thank you so much for your support, and I invite you to come back weekly to see what it is that we're up to. Blessings.